Are you ready to learn the truth about the conflict that halted the most extensive territorial expansion of the 19th century? What lies behind the idyllic image of the settlement of new lands radically changes our conventional view of the balance of power in history. We're used to seeing great powers dictate their terms, but sometimes a single small nation can rewrite the rules of the game. The history of colonization is often presented as a one-sided process, but behind the scenes of official documents lie dramatic battles and tactical defeats of the great powers. This story will make you rethink everything you knew about borders and influence in those distant and harsh times. The Russian Empire was rapidly advancing eastward, conquering the boundless expanses of Eurasia with astonishing speed and efficiency. Cossacks, industrialists, and statesmen created a network of outposts that stretched for thousands of kilometers across forests and mountains. This well-oiled machine operated without a hitch for decades, successfully absorbing new territories and subjugating them to its will. The imperial machine seemed an unstoppable force for which no obstacles stood in the way of the Pacific Ocean. The belief in the limitless possibilities of expanding borders fueled the boldest dreams of the rulers and adventurers of that time. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how the incredible organization of one indigenous people forced a vast empire to abandon its most ambitious plans and leave the North American continent for good. We'll take a detailed look at the tactical tricks used by local warriors and why professional soldiers were unable to counter them. You'll see that the decision to sell Alaska was driven not only by economics, but also by decades of grueling conflict with a determined adversary. This is a story about how courage and knowledge of one's land can stop even the most powerful army in the world. Get ready to see the hidden side of the great geopolitical deal that changed the map of our planet. What was found in the old archives completely shatters the myth of an easy and bloodless conquest of North American territories. For many years, explorers pushed through the taiga and tundra, following the same carefully calibrated and proven pattern. They built wooden fortified outposts at river mouths and at strategically important intersections of trade routes. These massive fortresses served as reliable protection for garrisons and as collection centers for valuable commercial resources. The local inhabitants of the North usually quickly yielded to the organized force and technological superiority of the arriving pioneers. The advance from the Ural Mountains to the shores of the Pacific Ocean took only 60 years of continuous and rapid movement. During this short time, an incredibly efficient logistical supply network was built to support the most remote forest outposts. Huge distances were covered along wide rivers in sturdy wooden boats during the short summer season. In winter, the explorers actively used wide skis and spacious sleds to transport cargo across frozen riverbeds. This system allowed relatively small armed detachments to tightly control territories of colossal size. The situation changed dramatically when the explorers' ships reached the southeastern coast of present-day Alaska. There they encountered a completely different landscape, consisting of dense coniferous forests and deep rocky fjords. They began to systematically and methodically drive the newcomers out of their traditional, most fertile fishing grounds. The explorers' wooden ships were subjected to constant, organized attacks while anchored in narrow, winding straits. It became abundantly clear that the familiar scenario of rapid territorial expansion had reached its logical and inevitable conclusion. A clash between two completely different cultural, economic, and military paradigms had become absolutely inevitable under these conditions. The explorers desperately tried to fortify themselves on the islands, cutting down vast swaths of forest and erecting high stockades around their camps. The Tlingit, meanwhile, used their superior knowledge of the rugged terrain to maintain constant, exhausting pressure on these isolated outposts. Each side understood perfectly well that control over the coast's richest resources would go to only one unconditional victor. This fierce confrontation dragged on for many years, completely depleting the resources of the mighty continental empire. This conflict forever changed the history of North American colonization and shattered the plans of a vast, powerful state. The situation clearly demonstrated to the whole world that even the most well-oiled system can collapse when confronted by organized will. I'd be very interested to hear your perspective on this remarkable historical phenomenon and the clash of cultures. What do you think about such dramatic twists in history? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new in-depth dives into the fascinating secrets of the past. Are you ready for the shocking truth about the structure of the indigenous society of southeastern Alaska at that time? The Tlingit were not merely hunters and gatherers, as they were often portrayed in old historical accounts. Their society functioned like a complex clockwork mechanism, where each clan had its own distinct duties and designated territories. A strict social hierarchy allowed them to mobilize significant forces in a very short period of time. Resource management was highly organized, ensuring that large settlements had everything they needed even during harsh winters. The center of social and military life was fortified wooden settlements located at strategically important points along the coast. They were built on high rocky headlands which always offered an excellent view for many kilometers around. During a campaign, every member of the group carried out the commander's orders absolutely without question and as quickly as possible. Such flawless organization allowed the Tlingits to conduct complex, coordinated attacks involving several hundred people. The newcomers were genuinely amazed by the coordination of this indigenous people's actions during their first military encounters. Their combat tactics were always based on the fundamental principle of surprise and the use of the advantages offered by the complex forested terrain. The units preferred to deliver short but devastating strikes, after which they instantly vanished into the dense coniferous forest. They avoided open frontal engagements in areas where the explorers could form a straight line for firing. The forest served as their most reliable cover, from which they could maintain constant visual surveillance of the enemy's movements. Every fallen tree and every large boulder on the shore was used for camouflage and stealthy movement. To ensure the element of surprise, the Tlingit used a complex system of sound signals that precisely imitated the voices of nature. The warriors communicated confidently with one another over considerable distances, without giving away their presence to outsiders at all. The coordination of their movements took place completely unnoticed by the explorers, who were in complete isolation at their bases. This unique ability allowed the indigenous people to concentrate large forces in the desired direction immediately before the attack. Until the very last moment, the enemy had absolutely no inkling of the threat rapidly closing in from all sides. The clash with such a developed and well-organized force came as a real shock to all the pioneers of that time. They were accustomed to dealing with scattered groups, not a clearly structured and trained military machine. Conventional intimidation tactics proved utterly useless against a society built on the strictest internal discipline. Every careless move by the newcomers was met with organized and very well-planned resistance from the local population. Do you think the explorers would have been able to gain a foothold in these lands if they had immediately realized the scale of the Tlingits' military might? A secret passed down from generation to generation reveals the main technical mystery behind the invulnerability of the local forest warriors. When the explorers' garrisons first opened, aimed fire on the advancing Tlingit ranks, they simply could not believe their eyes. Heavy lead bullets fired from powerful muskets simply bounced off the attackers' bodies, causing them no harm whatsoever. The warriors continued to advance relentlessly and confidently toward the palisades, despite the very heavy fire from firearms. The reason for this incredible phenomenon was a unique multi-layered protective system created from the bounty of the surrounding dense forest. Additional reliable protection was provided by a tall, thick collar, skillfully woven from stiff twigs and wide leather straps. This resilient collar tightly encircled the neck and lower face, eliminating any possibility of accidental injury to these vulnerable areas. Even in close hand-to-hand combat, breaking through such a complex, multi-layered defense was an extremely difficult physical task. Sharp metal spears and bayonets simply slid off the smooth surface of the dried walrus hide, finding no weak spots. A trained Tlingit warrior in armor became a veritable walking tank, fully protected from attacks from all sides. Crafting a single complete set of combat gear required a tremendous amount of time and the highest level of craftsmanship. Each individual wooden piece was meticulously tailored to the specific person's physique, ensuring maximum comfort during active combat. Skilled artisans applied intricate colored patterns to the wooden armor, depicting the crests of noble clans and powerful guardian spirits. These vivid designs held not only aesthetic, but also profound spiritual significance for every adult member of the tribe. A warrior sincerely believed that the correct totemic image gave him additional invisible strength and protected him in the fiercest battle. The existence of such a technically sophisticated system of protection vividly demonstrates the incredibly high level of technological development among indigenous peoples. They were able to find a perfectly effective solution to successfully counter the latest European weapons using only locally available materials. The ingenious engineering of the craftsmen of the Rocky Coast produced a product that truly altered the course of many significant historical events. This phenomenon undoubtedly deserves the most careful and in-depth study within the context of the global history of warfare. Innovations often arise in response to the emergence of fundamentally new, previously unknown types of global threats. Sturdy wooden armor became a true symbol of the unyielding will and remarkable technological ingenuity of the indigenous peoples of the Northwest. It allowed them to reliably withstand the onslaught of an armed enemy for many decades, maintaining full control over their ancestral lands. The rational use of available natural resources to create perfect multi-layered protection invariably inspires genuine admiration. If you enjoyed this in-depth technical analysis of unique military technologies from the past, be sure to like this video. Your continued support helps us create even more detailed and high-quality historical documentaries like this. Guess what happened next when explorers tried to hide their movements across the islands of the archipelago from prying eyes? All their secret attempts to organize covert armed expeditions invariably ended in complete failure, even before active operations began. The Tlingit always knew the exact departure times of the sailing ships, their planned routes, and the number of armed men on board. For a very long time, the newcomers could not figure out exactly how such important, secret strategic information was constantly being leaked. The answer always lay in the incredibly complex, effective, and highly ramified intelligence network of the local indigenous population. The Tlingit clan's information network completely covered vast territories, including hundreds of rocky islands and narrow winding straits. Every ordinary local resident, whether a simple fisherman in a canoe or a forager gathering wild berries, was an integral part of this vast system. They had good memories, memorized the officers' conversations, assessed food supplies, and counted the number of heavy barrels of gunpowder in the guarded warehouses. This detailed information was regularly and secretly passed on to their fellow tribesmen during special nighttime meetings far beyond the forts. In this way, the chiefs constantly had the most accurate and up-to-date first-hand information on the status of all enemy garrisons. With such a detailed and complete picture of the situation, Tlingit military strategists could plan their combat operations with striking mathematical precision. They launched their brief strikes only when they were absolutely certain of their numerical or overwhelming tactical superiority. If intelligence reported in time about a strong, well-prepared garrison, any attack was immediately canceled or postponed to a more favorable and safer time. Deadly ambushes were set up precisely in those narrow rocky straits through which the explorers' slow ships were bound to pass. The enemy was constantly in a state of complete information blindness, acting entirely at random in a foreign and extremely hostile world. This well-oiled intelligence system allowed the indigenous people to incredibly successfully block all attempts by the newcomers to expand their zone of control. Absolutely any landing of an armed detachment on a new shore was immediately placed under close surveillance by observation units hidden in the dense forest. As soon as the unsuspecting colonists began actively cutting down the forest to build a new fort, superior forces of local warriors would silently converge around them. High-quality intelligence ensured simply perfect coordination of the actions of numerous scattered clans to quickly achieve a common strategic goal. An invisible information network completely paralyzed the expansionist ambitions of the massive state colonial machine for many years. All the pitiful attempts by colonial explorers to establish their own reliable counterintelligence suffered a complete, unconditional, and crushing fiasco. They knew absolutely nothing of the complex local dialects, had very poor orientation in the tangled labyrinth of islands, and lacked loyal, reliable allies. Any financial attempts to bribe ordinary local residents usually resulted in nothing more than completely false or severely outdated information. The competent use of intelligence became one of the most crucial factors in the successful and prolonged resistance against the great empire. Intelligence quickly became as important and effective a weapon as sturdy wooden armor or heavy stone warhammers. Timely knowledge of the enemy's plans allowed relatively small forces to completely halt the advance of massive expeditionary military units. This striking historical example clearly demonstrates that complete mastery of information has always been the key to success. Do you think a vast empire could have won this conflict if it had had a modern communication system at its disposal? An important component of the indigenous people's tremendous success was their highly competent and far-sighted international diplomacy and large-scale commercial trade. The Tlingit very quickly and clearly understood that the best way to fight one powerful European power was with the help of another, equally powerful one. At the very same time, independent American and British merchant ships began to frequent the cold waters of the northwest coast. These enterprising traders were extremely interested in obtaining vast quantities of valuable furs and were constantly seeking reliable partners in the region. The wise local chiefs instantly realized the immense benefits of such international cooperation for rapidly strengthening their own military power. The fierce commercial competition between various groups of Europeans and Americans was masterfully and skillfully exploited for the defense of the entire coastline. American merchants, widely known in these parts as Bostonians, were more than willing to supply modern, effective firearms in exchange for excellent fur. They felt absolutely no moral qualms about arming the aggressive local population against their direct economic competitors. The Tlingit generously offered an incredibly high price for muskets and high-quality gunpowder, willingly parting with the finest marine animal pelts. This highly mutually beneficial free trade rapidly shifted the entire military balance of power across the vast archipelago. Far-sighted leaders did not simply blindly purchase any outdated weapons, they strictly demanded the most modern muskets and the finest gunpowder. Greedy Boston captains regularly brought excellent long-range flintlock rifles to the coast, which significantly outperformed the colonists' standard-issue weapons. In addition to high-quality guns, heavy lead bullets, long knives, sturdy iron axes, and even small, powerful ship cannons were actively procured. The technical superiority of the armed newcomers, upon which their strategy of large-scale expansion was entirely based, melted away in just a few short years. Yesterday's warriors of the forest very quickly acquired powerful tools of warfare of an entirely new generation in their skilled hands. Having gained access to modern weapons, the Tlingit immediately began to actively restructure their traditional, familiar tactics of open combat. They ingeniously combined the unique protective properties of their famous wooden armor with the high firepower of the new, top-of-the-line Boston muskets. The protected warriors could fire accurate, aimed shots from completely safe cover, being very reliably shielded from any returning gunfire. The heavy cannons they purchased were skillfully positioned within the fortified areas of their settlements, instantly transforming them into formidable and impregnable artillery bastions. Now they could confidently respond with heavy artillery fire to any attempts to bombard their forts from the enemy's wooden sailing ships. The constant strengthening of ties with independent foreign traders led to very significant structural changes in the economy of the indigenous population. Systematic fur harvesting was strictly organized into a continuous flow to ensure a constant, stable supply of the most modern weapons and high-quality ammunition. The Tlingit completely monopolized all trade across the vast forested territory, no longer allowing other, significantly weaker neighboring peoples to participate. They quickly became the most powerful trading intermediaries, strictly dictating their favorable terms to absolutely all participants in economic relations in this harsh region. Their accumulated wealth allowed them to easily withstand any prolonged economic siege of their territories without any loss of their accustomed standard of living. The deep integration of the indigenous population into the complex global trade network became the most decisive factor in the long-term defense of their independence. They simply masterfully and brilliantly exploited the economic contradictions between the world's major powers to ensure their own military and food security. Long-range muskets from distant Boston and first-class English gunpowder, easily purchased with harvested walrus tusks, completely halted the advance of the great continental empire. This stunning example of brilliant and subtle geopolitical maneuvering commands deep respect from historians even centuries after the events described. skilled international diplomacy proved far more powerful than absolutely any military bastions or high stockades built by strangers on this cold, rocky land. What if everything you were taught in classical European military history is completely outdated when applied to this unusual American conflict? Instead of grandiose and bloody large-scale battles in open fields, the cunning Tlingit imposed an extremely tenacious, exhausting, and protracted positional struggle on their enemy. They understood perfectly and pragmatically that a major general battle against trained regular units could lead to completely unjustified massive human losses among their warriors. Their primary strategic objective was not the physical annihilation of all armed colonizers, but rather the creation of utterly unbearable economic conditions for their continued presence. This subtle strategy of slowly and methodically suffocating the enemy proved far more effective than even the most large-scale, high-profile, and resource-intensive offensive operations. The foundation of this ingenious strategy was a complete economic blockade of all the remote and isolated wooden settlements of the explorers along the entire coast. Local, well-trained warriors took all approaches to the wooden forts from the side of the impenetrable, dark coniferous forest under very tight, round-the-clock control. Any small group of loggers or gatherers that left the safe, guarded perimeter was immediately subjected to a sudden and highly coordinated ambush. This completely deprived the defending colonists of the ability to independently obtain the necessary fresh meat and gather the vital wood needed to heat their homes in winter. The fort garrisons found themselves in the humiliating position of true prisoners within their own fortresses, becoming absolutely and completely dependent on rare supplies from the sea. Constant and intense psychological strain quickly became an inseparable and devastating part of the daily hardships within the blockaded fortifications. On dark nights, extremely frightening sounds constantly emanated from the forest thickets, skillfully mimicking the piercing cries of wild animals and the monotonous, rhythmic beating of drums. Exhausted sentries on high watchtowers constantly intensely awaited a sudden attack, straining their eyes until they ached as they peered into the thick, cold fog and the coastal thickets. The prolonged lack of normal, healthy sleep and proper rest very quickly led to severe moral exhaustion and deep apathy among the defending garrison soldiers. A clinging fear of the invisible and omnipresent enemy systematically eroded statutory military discipline far more effectively than any direct, brief combat encounters with the enemy. The long, cold winter months became a true and severe test of endurance for the fort garrisons, which were completely cut off from external supplies. Due to the tight armed blockade from the impenetrable forest, the freezing colonists were completely unable to gather enough firewood to adequately heat the cold quarters. Severe scurvy and other dangerous diseases, caused by an extremely meager and monotonous diet, began to slowly reap their terrible, merciless toll behind the high wooden palisades. The Tlingit, however, thanks to their ample supplies and well-insulated homes, weathered the harsh winter in complete warmth and absolute domestic comfort. The northern wilderness itself became the most reliable ally of the local indigenous population in this brutal and utterly merciless war of attrition. This complex strategy of attrition inflicted simply colossal and irreparable economic damage on all the empire's grand plans to conquer vast new territories. Instead of consistently yielding the expected massive profits from the sale of valuable furs, the wooden forts demanded constant, enormous financial injections just to cover their meager upkeep. Explorers were simply forced to maintain large armed garrisons that did not engage in fur hunting at all, but merely sat and defended themselves behind the walls. Ships that struggled to bring supplies from the mother country often returned half-empty, as large-scale hunting far beyond the protected forts had become completely impossible. The entire classical economic model of successful expansion, which had worked so incredibly well earlier in Siberia, collapsed here once and for all. This profound approach to defensive warfare has gone down in world history as an outstanding example of brilliant strategic and tactical foresight. A small independent people managed to completely halt a massive state machine simply by skillfully depriving it of its most vital fuel, financial and economic gain. Their coordinated actions clearly demonstrate that competent resource management is far more important than brute military force on any conventional battlefield. The total exhaustion of a powerful enemy became the most crucial and only correct key to preserving the independence and integrity of their native ancestral lands. Do you think it is safe to call such a tactic of slow and relentless economic pressure the most effective method of modern territorial defense? The culmination of this long-standing and extremely tense standoff was a large-scale and meticulously planned operation to destroy the colonizers' most important fortification. The massive wooden Fort St. Michael, located on the picturesque island of Sitka, served as a key staging ground for the empire's entire planned southward expansion. Its ambitious construction was the most direct and brazen challenge to the strongest and most influential clans, who completely controlled this vital economic and strategic region. Experienced Tlingit strategists prepared for this large-scale operation with great patience and over a long period of time, secretly amassing a massive force and meticulously working out every stage of the attack plan. They fully understood that the complete destruction of this very large fort would send a powerful political signal to absolutely all parties involved in the conflict along the coast. The attackers' primary and top priority was the massive warehouses containing captured artillery and the fully stocked arsenals of modern weapons and ammunition. They sought not only to completely destroy their enemy's main base, but also to seize all valuable resources for their continued successful armed struggle. Absolutely all material supplies that were physically impossible to carry away were immediately subjected to systematic, ruthless, and complete destruction by fire. The massive Fort St. Michael, once the colonizers' greatest pride, was reduced to black, smoldering, and smoking ruins in just a few hours. This large-scale operation inflicted simply colossal and irreparable reputational and economic damage on the entire system of governance established over the new overseas territories. The terrible news of the rapid fall of the key and most heavily fortified base spread incredibly quickly along the entire coast, inspiring other weaker tribes to resist. The Tlingit clearly demonstrated to the whole world that even the colonizers' most heavily fortified installations were by no means invulnerable to their well-coordinated combined forces. This resounding victory became a true symbol of the complete triumph of their unique military system and the absolute correctness of their long-standing strategy of wearing down the enemy. For the proud empire, the complete loss of the fort came as a genuine shock, forcing it to completely and radically rethink absolutely all of its plans in this region. It became absolutely and crystal clear that holding these vast territories with the same small expeditionary forces was absolutely and physically impossible under current conditions. The top leadership of the colonial administration, in a fit of rage, attempted to exact swift revenge by organizing a retaliatory, incredibly large-scale military expedition with the active participation of the combat fleet. They hastily assembled a very significant force to regain control of the lost, strategically important island and quickly rebuild the destroyed fort. A protracted and incredibly grueling confrontation began, widely known in official military history as the Battle of Sitka, where the full might of two worlds collided. The Tlingit had very prudently and in advance constructed a new powerful wooden fortification capable of easily withstanding even very intense artillery fire from sailing ships. This massive wooden structure became a completely insurmountable and extremely dangerous obstacle in the path of the entire expeditionary military corps of the vast continental empire. The dramatic events on Sitka Island became a true historical turning point in the entire long history of the conquest of the northwestern coast of America. They vividly and harshly demonstrated to the whole world the limits of even the largest and most powerful land-based empire of its time. The total destruction of the forts and the extremely stubborn, long-standing resistance became the main arguments against continuing any active territorial expansion in this region. These large-scale battles are forever etched in the annals of world military history as an outstanding example of remarkable courage, iron discipline, and the highest level of tactical skill. The struggle of a relatively small people was able to radically alter the highly global and ambitious geopolitical plans of the world's largest colonial power. After all the devastating events at Sitka, the nature of the colonizers' permanent presence on the coast changed radically and irrevocably for the worse. They no longer entertained any thoughts of a rapid advance southward or attempts to seize new, rich fur trading territories. Any expedition, even the smallest one, beyond the safe line of sight of the fort immediately required an incredibly large and heavily armed escort. This made any pursuit of valuable furs an absolutely unprofitable and extremely deadly endeavor for the traders remaining on the coast. The weak colonial administration was forced to officially acknowledge its de facto total powerlessness in territories beyond its high city walls. This dire situation was constantly exacerbated by the simply unbelievable turnover of qualified personnel among all employees of the state-run colonial trading company. People categorically refused to voluntarily travel to these harsh and cold regions, where their lives were constantly and hourly exposed to mortal danger from the forest. The small garrisons were formed from a completely random group of people who lacked proper military training and had absolutely no financial incentive. Military discipline in such closed and completely isolated communities very often fell to critically low levels, leading to widespread drunkenness and dangerous mutinies. Effectively governing such troubled territories became a virtually impossible task for the very few and incompetent local administrators. Meanwhile, experienced American and British traders continued to conduct their business completely unhindered and very profitably in the waters of this archipelago. They captured the lion's share of all valuable furs harvested, openly exchanging them for modern weapons and other necessary goods directly with the local inhabitants. In the capital of a vast empire, people began to ask themselves, with growing frequency, the entirely logical question of whether it was still worthwhile to hold on to these troubled overseas territories. All the financial reports showed nothing but colossal losses, which were barely covered by direct government subsidies and expensive loans. An insurmountable military barrier in the form of the indigenous local population forced the great invincible machine of expansion to halt and slowly retreat. This was the first major instance in the history of the powerful state when a large-scale advance had been so harshly and categorically blocked. The cost of maintaining military control proved to be incomparably higher than the mythical profits that these cold northern lands had once yielded. The time was inexorably approaching to make an incredibly difficult, yet the only correct, political decision regarding the future fate of these troubled colonies. The dramatic history of the conflict was moving inexorably toward its highly logical and completely unexpected for many contemporaries political conclusion. By the mid-19th century, the overall financial situation surrounding the empire's remote American possessions had become simply catastrophic and insoluble. The harvest of valuable, thick sea otter fur, once the primary source of enormous revenue, had shrunk to its historic absolute low. The strict Tlingit blockade and the completely uncontrolled poaching activities of foreign competitors had done their dirty work, completely ruining the colonial monopoly. The daily costs of maintaining a highly cumbersome administrative apparatus and armed military garrisons continued to rise steadily every single month. Maintaining this status quo required simply enormous cash injections from the state's depleted treasury, which itself was facing a colossal deficit. The infrastructure built on the rocky coast was deteriorating at an incredible rate and required constant, complex, and very costly repairs. The old wooden forts were rotting in the humid climate, ships were being destroyed by shipworms, and there were not enough qualified specialists to build new vessels. Transporting all these necessary building materials from the other end of the vast world was pure economic madness under conditions of constant direct military threat. All desperate attempts to establish local brick production or shipbuilding ran into a severe labor shortage and sabotage. The distant colony had finally turned into a bottomless, empty barrel into which the colossal funds of the taxpayers of a vast country vanished without a trace. The global political situation was also developing extremely unfavorably for the continued retention of these highly remote, problematic overseas territories. The looming large-scale armed conflict in Europe demanded the immediate concentration of absolutely all military and financial resources in the metropolis. Maintaining combat-ready ships and garrisons there at the very edge of the world for the sake of highly illusory trade benefits was utterly irrational and extremely dangerous. The empire's far-sighted government seriously feared that, should a global war break out, these lands would be incredibly easy for the powerful British fleet to capture. Defending this incredibly long and extremely vulnerable, indented coastline against a powerful attack from the sea was simply physically impossible for the empire. They convincingly argued that continuing a military presence in the region would inevitably bring only new disappointments and even greater colossal losses to the treasury. The long-term geopolitical interests of the powerful state urgently demanded the immediate strengthening of its positions along the southern and western borders of the continent. The idea of permanently transferring the problematic, frigid lands to another state was gradually but surely taking hold in the minds of top government officials. For the great empire, this was an incredible opportunity to resolve several critical strategic challenges at once with a single elegant and advantageous diplomatic move. First, to significantly replenish the state treasury, depleted by years of war, with a very substantial sum in highly stable foreign gold currency. Second, to permanently rid itself of the need to annually finance extremely unprofitable territories and resolve endless bloody conflicts with the local population. Third, to create a very powerful friendly territorial buffer between its eastern borders and the holdings of its main geopolitical rival, Great Britain. The harsh logic of cold, hard state interest finally triumphed over old imperial ambitions and the thirst for new and utterly unnecessary territorial acquisitions at the ends of the earth. The long, incredibly grueling war of economic attrition finally bore its long-awaited fruit, culminating in the complete withdrawal of the colonizers' army from the islands. This incredible victory was the best proof that the iron will of a people can easily change the map of the world without signing a single surrender. Their steadfastness wrote the very last page in the history of this extremely unusual and incredibly large-scale bloody confrontation between two different worlds. In 1867, this deal was officially finalized, and absolutely all of the vast territories of cold Alaska came under the jurisdiction of the United States. This momentous date marked the official end of a very long period of the first great wave of colonizers on the vast North American continent. Historians will continue to debate the reasons for this strange act for a very long time, putting forward completely different political and complex economic theories. But the foundation of this historic decision was precisely the fierce resistance of the free people of the coast, who permanently halted the empire's expansion. Without the Tlingits' intervention, the entire economy of these rich lands could have developed along a completely different, far more profitable and peaceful path. New American troops arrived for a scheduled garrison rotation in the deserted wooden forts, symbolizing the beginning of a completely new historical era. They immediately encountered the same harsh nature and the same extremely independent local population as their ill-fated predecessors. However, the United States took a completely different approach to the large-scale development of new territories and the establishment of commercial relations with the indigenous peoples. Technology had changed significantly, logistics had changed, and the conflict gradually shifted to an entirely different political plane. Nevertheless, the rich legacy of the Tlingits' fierce resistance continued to influence many processes in this harsh region. The incredible military system of the coastal indigenous peoples, their sturdy wooden armor, and effective reconnaissance methods have become firmly embedded in numerous legends. They vividly demonstrated to the whole world that highly asymmetrical methods of warfare can be incredibly effective even against a technologically superior enemy. Modern researchers are increasingly turning to this forgotten period, finding entirely new evidence of the incredibly high level of organization among the indigenous population. It is becoming abundantly clear that the entire history of the large-scale colonization of North America was by no means an easy, one-sided process of complete domination by European technology. A careful study of this forgotten conflict forces us to completely rethink many established stereotypes about the clash of civilizations during the Age of Discovery. It turns out that so-called backward peoples quite successfully possessed highly complex social structures and an absolutely outstanding diplomatic instinct in resolving their problems. They were highly skilled at playing a very complex geopolitical game, using international trade to reliably protect their sovereignty and territorial independence. The sturdy wooden armor became a beautiful metaphor for the utterly unbreakable will of free people, desperately defending their inalienable right to life and liberty. This true story quickly shatters old myths and opens up entirely new, significantly more objective perspectives on the past of all humanity. The unprecedented sale of Alaska was a truly unique event, with virtually no parallels in the modern history of the world's great powers. This historical fact strongly confirms the unshakable rule that absolutely no system of military expansion can be completely universal or absolutely fail-safe. Sooner or later, absolutely any well-oiled mechanism inevitably encounters completely unforeseen conditions capable of destroying it completely and irrevocably. The encounter with the intelligent Tlingit people became precisely such an incredible, fateful glitch in the program for the entire system of massive imperial development of entirely new, cold lands. The remarkable flexibility of thought among all the local chiefs very easily overcame the sluggishness and rigidity of the vast state colonial bureaucracy of their time. We conclude our fascinating journey into that distant era when the fates of vast continents were very often decided in incredibly narrow, rocky fjords. This striking, forgotten page of the past teaches us very reliably never to completely underestimate the absolute power of organized will and love for one's homeland. The most monumental historical processes very often depend on the decisive actions of a very small but incredibly determined group of people ready to defend what is theirs. The unique experience of this forgotten conflict remains a very timely reminder that strategy and ingenuity can very easily overcome superior force. The vast world of history carefully preserves an incredible multitude of similar, unsolved mysteries and completely forgotten victories patiently awaiting their new researcher. The history of the Tlingit and the Russian-Indian War in Alaska proves that we are far from knowing everything about the great confrontations of the past. This little-known conflict completely changes our perception of the events of that time and reveals the true cost of colonial conquests. Let us know in the comments what other historical topics and conflicts you'd like to see in our next videos. Share your ideas and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new in-depth dives into forgotten pages of history.